What would you do if an alien spacecraft crashed in your backyard and the being that emerged asked you to fix it? The story I'm going to tell you today about a farmer who found himself in an impossible situation will leave you questioning everything about what we really know about who's out there. Before we dive deeper, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Grab yourself a warm drink, maybe a cup of tea, or just some water and sit back as we begin this journey together. Now prepare yourself for a discovery that no one was expecting. Jefferson County, Kentucky, October 15th, 1997, 9:37 p.m. John Miller was finishing his last nighttime rounds of the farm when he saw strange lights in the sky. At 58 years old, he had spent his entire adult life caring for the same lands that had belonged to his family for 3 generations. And he knew every sound, every shadow, and every light that should or shouldn't be there after sunset. Those lights definitely shouldn't have been there. "What the hell is that?" John muttered, stopping his pickup truck to get a better look. At first he thought it might be a helicopter or perhaps a plane flying low. But the movement was too erratic, too irregular for any aircraft he knew. The lights blinked in patterns that didn't follow aviation regulations, and there was something about the way they moved that simply didn't seem normal. John turned off the truck's engine and got out to get a better view. The object, whatever it was approaching his property, and as it got closer, he could see that it definitely wasn't anything made by human technology. Instinctively, John placed his hand on the handle of the .38 revolver he always carried on his belt. 40 years of rural life had taught him it was better to be prepared for anything, especially when that anything was flying directly toward his property in the middle of the night. The thing had an oval shape, a surface that reflected moonlight in impossible ways, and moved with a smoothness that defied everything John knew about aerodynamics. There was no engine sound, just a low, constant hum that he could feel more than hear. "Jesus Christ," John whispered, his hand gripping the gun's handle firmly as he watched the object pass directly over his head. The fear was real and visceral. In 1997, the idea of UFOs was still mainly the territory of conspiracy theories and science fiction movies. Seeing something like this up close alone on his isolated property made John's heart race with a mixture of terror and fascination. Then something began to go wrong with the object. The lights that had been constant began to blink irregularly. The harmonious hum became irregular and discordant, and the smooth movement transformed into worrying oscillation. John didn't need to be an aeronautical engineer to recognize an aircraft in trouble when he saw one. "It's going to crash," he realized, watching the object struggle to maintain altitude. For a moment, John considered running to his house, locking the doors, and pretending nothing had happened. Whatever that thing was, it would probably be better to let the authorities deal with it. But then his farmer's instincts kicked in. If something was crashing on his property, it was his responsibility to deal with the situation. The object managed some kind of emergency landing in the middle of his cornfield, creating a circular area where the plants were bent but not destroyed. Steam rose from several openings on its surface, and the lights flashed a few times before going out completely. John stood still for a long moment, hands still on his weapon, trying to process what he had just witnessed. A spacecraft, because it was obvious that's what it was, had just made a crash landing on his property. "Well, shit," John muttered, looking at the silent ship. Despite the fear that made his legs tremble, John knew he couldn't simply ignore the situation. If there was something or someone injured inside, he had a moral obligation to help. That's how he'd been raised. John grabbed his most powerful flashlight from the pickup, checked that his weapon was loaded, and carefully approached the ship. The structure seemed safe to approach, though clearly damaged. Cracks were visible on the metallic surface, and some sections appeared to be leaking some kind of fluid that glowed faintly. That's when an opening appeared on the side of the ship, as if the metallic surface itself had simply dissolved, revealing a dimly lit interior. John immediately drew his weapon, pointing it at the opening while backing up a few steps. "Who's there?" he shouted, his voice trembling only slightly. "Come out slowly with your hands where I can see them." Something emerged stumbling from the ship. The being that came out made John slowly lower his weapon more from shock than relief. It was humanoid, approximately his own height, but with slightly different proportions. Its skin was blue, a deep, vibrant blue that seemed to glow with its own light, and its eyes were larger than human ones, expressive in a way that immediately communicated intelligence and also pain. The blue being staggered a few steps before falling to its knees, clearly injured. Despite all his fear and confusion, John's fundamental instincts as a decent human being overcame his need for self-preservation. Holstering his weapon but keeping his hand near it, John approached cautiously. "Hey, are you okay?" John asked, his voice still tense but genuinely concerned. "Are you hurt?" The blue being raised its head and looked directly into Jay's eyes. For a moment that seemed to last eternities, they simply observed each other. Then, in a way that defied all logic, John heard a clear voice speaking English directly in his mind. "My ship severely damaged, propulsion systems compromised. You can help with repairs." John felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. Not only was he face to face with a real alien, but the thing was speaking inside his head and asking for help. I'm good at fixing things," John managed to respond, his voice from shock. "But I've never fixed anything like this. You possess skills that you do not fully understand." The mental voice responded, laden with desperate hope. "I can detect unusual energy patterns in your manual abilities. Perhaps you can help in ways that neither you nor I anticipate." John looked at the damaged ship, then back at the injured blue being, and realized he was about to make a decision that would change his life forever. John Miller wasn't the type of man who went looking for complications in life. At 58 years old, he had built a deliberately simple existence centered on hard work, traditional values, and a practical philosophy that most of the world's problems could be solved with your own hands and a little common sense. Single for more than a decade after an amicable divorce, John found satisfaction in his solitude and took pride in his self-sufficiency. His 200-acre farm in Jefferson County had been Miller family property for 3 generations. John had inherited both the land and a reputation for being the best fixer in the region, a man who could make any broken thing work again, from ancient tractors to electronic equipment that certified technicians had declared total losses. "John Miller can fix anything" was a common saying in the rural area around Bardstown. If he can't make it work, then the thing was really dead. This reputation had begun in childhood when John demonstrated an almost supernatural ability to diagnose mechanical and electronic problems that baffled experienced adults. At 12, he was repairing lawnmower engines that local mechanics had abandoned. By 16, farmers from neighboring counties were bringing complex agricultural equipment for him to examine. "The boy has a gift," his father Robert Miller used to say with obvious pride. "He can look at a broken machine and somehow know exactly what's wrong, even when there are no obvious signs of the problem." During school, John was never an exceptional student in traditional academic subjects, but teachers noticed he possessed a form of practical intelligence that transcended textbook knowledge. He could solve problems through intuition and hands-on experience that left college engineers puzzled. After graduating high school in 1957, John served 2 years in the Army during the tail end of the draft era. Even in military service, his reputation as an equipment fixer followed him. Sergeants frequently sought him out when military vehicles or communication equipment failed in ways that technical manuals didn't cover. "Miller has a special touch," commented his supervising sergeant in his discharge evaluation. "He can make dead radios talk and broken Jeeps run. I don't know how he does it, but I've never seen anything like it." Returning to the family farm after his military service, John gradually took on more responsibilities as his father aged. He modernized farming operations but always maintained a preference for equipment he could understand and repair with his own hands, rather than depending on complex technology that required specialized technicians. During the 70s and 80s, John married Linda Patterson, a local school teacher who appreciated his steady nature and dedication to work. The marriage was happy for 15 years, but eventually fell apart not from conflict, but from fundamental differences about life direction. Linda wanted to move to a bigger city, explore opportunities beyond rural life, while John was deeply rooted in the land his family had farmed for generations. There's nothing wrong with John, Linda explained to friends after their amicable divorce in 1989. He's a good man, hardworking and honest, but he's so connected to that farm, it's like it's part of his soul. I needed something different. After the divorce, John found unexpected peace in his solitary life. He developed routines that revolved around caring for his land, maintaining equipment, and occasional help to neighbors with mechanical problems. His house became an informal workshop where people brought broken items, knowing John would find a way to make them work again. There were aspects of John's personality that even close neighbors didn't fully understand. His repair abilities seemed to transcend conventional technical knowledge. He frequently diagnosed problems in equipment that worked perfectly during tests, but developed specific failures days or weeks later, exactly as John had predicted. It's like he can sense when something's about to break, observed Tom Bradley, a neighboring farmer who had seen John predict equipment failures multiple times. He touches a machine and somehow knows that a specific part will fail in 2 weeks. John attributed his successes to experience and careful observation, but secretly knew there was something more involved. When working with broken equipment, he often felt as if he were communicating directly with the machines, understanding their needs and problems at a level that transcended technical diagrams or formal mechanical knowledge. Every machine has its own personality, John had once explained to his nephew, who was interested in learning about repairs. You have to listen to what it's trying to tell you, not just look at the obvious symptoms. During the 90s, as technology became increasingly complex, John maintained his preference for simpler equipment he could understand completely. He used a landline phone instead of a cell phone, drove a 1985 Ford pickup that he kept in perfect condition, and avoided computers whenever possible. I'm not against progress, John would explain when people asked about his resistance to new technologies. But I prefer to understand completely how something works before depending on it. And the more complicated something is, the more ways there are for it to break. Spiritually, John maintained a simple but sincere faith. He attended the local Baptist church, irregularly believed in God and traditional Christian values, but avoided complex theological discussions. His spirituality was practical. He saw evidence of divine design in the harmonious functioning of natural systems and in the satisfaction he found in honest work. During the months leading up to the encounter that would change his life, John had noticed subtle changes in his perception and abilities. His diagnoses of mechanical problems were becoming even more accurate. He felt inexplicably drawn to check equipment that subsequently developed problems, and there were moments when he felt as if something was trying to communicate with him through signals he couldn't decode. Maybe I'm getting old. John had thought attributing these experiences to the natural sharpening of skills that came with decades of practical experience. It was this unique combination of exceptional technical competence developed in mechanical intuition and openness to mysteries that transcended conventional explanation that had prepared John Miller for the most extraordinary experience of his life. Without knowing it, he had spent decades developing exactly the character qualities and practical skills that would make him capable of responding adequately to the challenge of repairing technology that was literally out of this world. The decision to help the injured blue being was one of the most difficult John had faced in his 58 years. His rational mind screamed that he should run home, call the sheriff, maybe even the FBI. But something deeper, a combination of basic compassion and the curiosity that had always driven his need to fix broken things, kept him in place. All right, John finally said, his voice still tense but determined. Let's see what I can do. The blue being, who had introduced himself telepathically as Keth struggled to stand clearly in pain, but visibly relieved by John's willingness to help. Your assistance is unexpected, but most welcome. Keth transmitted his mental communication loaded with deep gratitude. My ship suffered multiple system failures during unforeseen electromagnetic storm. Without repairs, I cannot return to my base of operations. John followed Keth to the ship, his weapon still on his belt, but his hands free to carry his toolbox, which he had retrieved from his pickup. As they approached the opening in the ship's side, John could see the interior more clearly. A bewildering mixture of organic surfaces and components that were clearly technological, but unlike any electronics he knew. Jesus, John muttered, observing panels that appeared to be made of liquid crystal pulsing with complex light patterns. How the hell does this work? Systems based on energetic harmony, Keth explained, sensing Jay's confusion. Not brute mechanical force like current human technology, but conscious coordination between living components and responsive materials. John cautiously entered the ship, immediately noticing that the interior was much larger than the external dimensions suggested. It wasn't an illusion. The space really seemed to extend beyond what should have been physically possible. This doesn't make sense, John said, looking around a space that clearly violated basic laws of geometry. Dimensional compression, Keth replied simply, a concept your science will eventually discover. As Keth guided him through the ship, pointing out areas of damage and explaining systems that had failed, John discovered something surprising. Despite the alien nature of the technology, there were familiar aspects, energy patterns. He could sense connections that made intuitive sense even when he didn't understand the scientific principles involved. This module controls primary propulsion, Keth explained, indicating an area where fist-sized crystals were cracked and dull. Harmonic resonators were misaligned by electrical overload. John examined the damaged crystals, touching them carefully. The moment his hands made contact, he felt something extraordinary, as if he could perceive the energy patterns that should have been flowing through them, but were blocked by microfractures and misalignment. I can feel what's wrong, John said, surprised by his own statement. It's like when an engine is out of tune. You can hear that it's not running right even when you can't see the problem. Exactly, Keth transmitted obvious excitement, tinging his mental communication. You possess natural sensitivity to harmonic patterns. This is very rare even among my own species. Over the following hours, John worked under Keth's guidance to diagnose and repair the ship's damaged systems. It was the most extraordinary repair experience he had ever undertaken. Instead of bolts and welds, he was realigning crystals through careful pressure and focused intention. Instead of checking voltage, he was feeling energy flows and adjusting components until they felt right. Your approach is remarkable, Keth observed as John worked on a complex control panel. You do not force solutions or try to dominate resistant systems. Instead, you collaborate with the technology. John paused for a moment, realizing that Keth had perfectly described his approach to repair work that he had developed over decades. Never thought about it that way, John admitted. But I suppose I've always treated machines like they had personalities, like they needed to be convinced to work, not forced. This is profound wisdom, Keth responded. Truly advanced technology requires cooperation between consciousness and matter. Your species is still learning this principle. As the work continued, John discovered that his repair abilities were being mysteriously amplified. He could perceive problems in systems that Keth hadn't even mentioned yet. Sense when adjustments were correct through energy feedback he had never experienced with terrestrial equipment. This isn't normal, John said, watching how a set of crystals he had realigned now pulsed with harmonious light. I shouldn't be able to work with this technology. I don't understand how any of it works. Intellectual understanding is not always necessary for effective function, Keith explained patiently. You operate from intuitive wisdom that transcends formal technical knowledge. This is a much more valuable ability than your culture currently recognizes. The decisive moment came when they reached what Keith described as the ship's harmonic core, a basketball-sized crystalline sphere that served as the main power source. The sphere was completely lifeless, cracked in multiple places, and emanating a sense of death that John could literally feel. This component is critical, Keth transmitted with obvious discouragement. Without functional core ship remains inoperable, but repair requires techniques I cannot easily teach. John studied the damaged sphere, passing his hands around it without touching. He could sense that it had once been a living, vibrant component, but now was silent and fragmented. What would happen if I just tried to fix it like anything else that's broken, John asked. Keith hesitated. Harmonic core responds to focused conscious intention. If you could somehow infuse positive vital energy while realigning physical fragments. John didn't wait for further explanation. He placed his hands directly on the cracked sphere and simply began to work applying the same patient's care and focused intention he used to repair anything that came broken to his workshop. What happened next surprised both of them. The sphere began to glow faintly as John worked cracks gradually closing and a sense of life returning that was almost tangible. Impossible, Cal transmitted with wonder. You are actually repairing harmonic core with techniques that should not work for your species. When John finally finished, the sphere pulsed with steady, healthy light, and systems throughout the ship began reactivating spontaneously. How did you do that? Keith asked, his mental communication loaded with something that could only be described as reverence. Same way I fix anything, John replied, still not fully understanding what he had accomplished. You listen to what's wrong, feel what needs to be adjusted, and work with care until it runs right again. It was only the beginning of discoveries that would completely transform John's understanding of his own abilities and purpose. During the 3 days that followed the initial repair of the ship, Keth remained on John's property to complete final recalibrations and allow the energy systems to fully stabilize. It was during this period of working together that the blue being began to reveal information that would completely transform John's understanding of his abilities and the true meaning of the work he had done throughout his life. John Miller Keth transmitted during their second morning working together. I must explain something about your capabilities that you do not fully understand. What you did with my ship was not simply skillful mechanical repair. John was adjusting a series of smaller components that Keth had identified as needing fine calibration. His hands seemed to instinctively know how each piece should be positioned, despite having no formal training with alien technology. Well, it worked, John responded pragmatically. Sometimes you don't need to completely understand something to fix it. This is exactly my point. Keith continued, your approach to repair, done with patience, genuine care, and positive intention rather than haste or frustration, creates energetic frequency that aligns components in perfect harmony. You unconsciously infuse love and positive intention into every repair. John stopped working for a moment, absorbing what Keth had said. You're saying there's something special about the way I fix things. Very special, Keth confirmed. Observe how you work. Never force connections that resist. Always listen to energetic feedback from systems. Treat each component as if it were alive and worthy of respect. This is an approach that recognizes inherent consciousness in all matter. During the conversations that followed, Keth revealed concepts that challenged everything John thought he knew about work technology and spirituality. In advanced civilizations, Keth explained there is no distinction between mechanical work and spiritual practice. Every profession, from farmers like yourself to healers and builders, is recognized as an opportunity to channel conscious energy for the benefit of larger systems. John learned that his farm had prospered for decades not just due to good agricultural practices, but because he unconsciously treated the land and animals and equipment as conscious beings worthy of respect and care. When you plant seeds, Keth observed, you do not merely place them in soil. You bless them with intention for healthy growth. When you care for animals, you connect with their emotional well-being. When you maintain equipment, you collaborate with their intended function instead of simply exploiting them. This revelation made John reflect on decades of agricultural work. It was true that he had always felt connected to his land in a way that transcended purely economic. He really did talk to his word about the individual health of plants and treated equipment as trusted partners rather than mere tools. So you're saying that my work as a farmer is spiritual? John asked, struggling to integrate concepts that seem simultaneously strange and familiar. Every profession becomes spiritual when practiced with consciousness and love, Keth transmitted. Doctors who heal with genuine compassion, teachers who educate with infinite patience, builders who create with intention to benefit others, all are channeling divine energy through practical application. John discovered that his reputation as an exceptional fixer derived not from superior technical knowledge, but from his natural ability to infuse love and positive intention into his work. When you repair equipment with genuine care, Keth explained, you literally reorganize molecular energy patterns to restore original harmony. This is why your repairs last longer and function better than those made through purely mechanical methods. During their joint work sessions, Keth taught John how to consciously recognize the energetic processes he had been using intuitively throughout his life. Observe how you feel when working with love versus when working with frustration, Keith instructed. Notice the difference in material responsiveness. John began paying conscious attention to the quality of his intention during repair work. He discovered that when he approached tasks with haste or irritation, components seemed to resist his efforts. But when he worked from patience and genuine care, material seemed to cooperate in ways that transcended mechanical probability. This is extraordinary, John admitted, after a particularly clear demonstration of this difference. It's like the machines themselves can sense my attitude. Because they can, Keth replied simply, consciousness permeates all matter to varying degrees. Truly advanced technology is designed to respond to conscious intention. Even primitive human technology retains rudimentary capacity for this responsiveness. The most extraordinary revelation came when Keth explained that John's farm had been chosen for this encounter, not by chance, but because it had served as a monitoring point for his civilization for generations. Your family carries lineage of terrestrial guardians, Keith revealed carefully. Consciousnesses that voluntarily incarnate to maintain energetic harmony at specific points on the planet. Your farm is located at an important nexus of terrestrial energy lines. John learned that his deep attraction to the land he had inherited, his natural ability to make things grow and function, and his instinctive resistance to leaving the property were all indications of his function as an unconscious guardian of an important energetic point. My father and grandfather were also guardians. John asked, beginning to see family patterns in new light. Each generation of your family served this function differently, Keth confirmed. Your grandfather maintained harmony through intuitive agricultural practice. Your father through careful environmental stewardship. You through conscious infusion of positive energy into all systems under your care. The final mission that Keth revealed was that John had been prepared throughout his life to serve as a bridge between traditional human knowledge and expanded understanding about the conscious nature of work. Your function now, Keth explained, is to demonstrate through example that any profession can become a path of sacred service when practiced with appropriate consciousness. You will show others that the separation between spiritual and secular work is artificial. John understood that he should continue doing exactly what he had always done, farming, fixing equipment, caring for his land. But now with conscious understanding that each action was an opportunity to channel benevolent energy for the benefit of larger systems. I don't need to completely change my life, John asked, somewhat relieved. The deepest change Keth transmitted was something that felt like affection, is recognizing the sacred in the ordinary. Your simple life will become extraordinary when you recognize that spirituality does not require temples or complex rituals, but conscious presence in each action. The final revelation was that this awakening was not just for Jay's personal benefit, but part of a larger process where workers in all professions around the world were being gently awakened to the spiritual dimensions of their work. A time is coming, Keth concluded, when humanity will rediscover that conscious work is one of the most powerful forms of prayer and service to the greater good. Despite the extraordinary demonstrations he had witnessed during his work sessions with Keth John Miller, faced weeks of profound doubt and internal resistance that threatened to completely shake his ability to accept the revelations about the spiritual nature of his work. The implications of what Keth had shared were so vast and transformative that John's practical mind struggled desperately to find conventional explanations that could preserve his previous view of himself as an ordinary farmer. The first wave of resistance emerged the day after Keth's departure, when John woke up in his familiar bed and tried to process everything that had happened during the last 3 days. Under the clear morning light surrounded by the familiar objects of his house, the entire experience began to seem surreal, almost like an elaborate dream. "Maybe I'm going crazy," John muttered to himself while making coffee, looking out the window at the cornfield where the ship had landed. There were no visible marks on the earth, no physical evidence that anything extraordinary had happened there. John spent the entire morning searching for evidence of the encounter. He scoured his workshop looking for tools that might have traces of work on alien technology, examined the field looking for alterations in the soil, and even checked to see if he had developed any obvious new abilities that might confirm Keth's claims. Nothing, he concluded with a mixture of relief and disappointment. Everything looks exactly as it always has. This lack of tangible physical evidence fueled growing doubts about the reality of the entire experience. John began to question whether he had suffered some kind of psychotic episode, perhaps caused by stress, social isolation, or even exposure to agricultural chemicals. The second wave of doubt was even more disturbing. John began to question the implications of accepting that his simple work life possessed profound spiritual dimensions. The idea contradicted decades of practical thinking about work as basic economic necessity. "Work is work," John said to himself during a particularly difficult morning. "You do what needs to be done to survive and keep the property functioning." All this talk about conscious energy and terrestrial guardians is, well, it's madness. The possibility that he could be something more significant than an ordinary farmer made him uncomfortable in ways he couldn't fully articulate. John had built his identity around values like humility, hard work, and practicality. The suggestion that he possessed some kind of special cosmic role seemed to contradict everything he believed about himself. The third wave of resistance involved fear of the social consequences of accepting or sharing the revelations he had received. John lived in a conservative rural community where people valued common sense religious tradition and skepticism about anything that smelled of New Age or unconventional spirituality. "If I start talking about aliens and conscious energy," John worried, "they'll think I have completely lost my mind. I'll lose my reputation in the community, maybe even my business." John imagined scenarios where neighbors would start avoiding him, where his church would consider him influenced by non-Christian forces, where his credibility as a trustworthy repairman would be destroyed by association with ideas most would consider absurd. The fourth wave of doubt was perhaps the most fundamental. John began to question whether he really wanted Keth's revelations to be true. Accepting that he was a terrestrial guardian with cosmic responsibilities would mean abandoning the simplicity of life he had valued for decades. "I like my life the way it is," John reflected, during one of his nightly walks around the property. "It's simple, understandable, and I know exactly what my role is. Why complicate it with spiritual responsibilities I didn't ask for?" There was also the deeper fear that accepting these revelations might fundamentally change his relationship with the work he had always loved. What if consciousness about the spiritual dimensions of farming and repair made these activities self-conscious or artificial? What if thinking about conscious energy interfered with the natural intuition that had always guided his work? The fifth wave of resistance involved questions about free will and self-determination. If Keth was correct about John being part of a lineage of guardians who had served this function for generations, did that mean his entire life had been predetermined? I made my own choices, John insisted to himself. I chose to stay on the farm, chose to dedicate myself to the work I do, chose to live the way I live. I'm not a puppet of some cosmic plan. The idea that his life decisions could have been unconsciously influenced by genetic or spiritual programming disturbed him deeply. It seemed to diminish his personal autonomy and transform accomplishments he was proud of into simple fulfillment of predetermined destiny. The sixth wave of doubt involved religious questions that touched the core of his faith. John had been raised in the conservative Christian tradition that emphasized personal relationship with Jesus Christ and was suspicious of any spirituality that wasn't explicitly biblical. What if these ideas about conscious energy and terrestrial guardians are incompatible with Christianity? John wondered during moments of particular spiritual anguish. What if accepting Keth's revelations means turning away from God? He spent several nights reading his Bible, searching for guidance on how to reconcile the extraordinary experiences he had had with familiar religious doctrines. The lack of clear biblical references to benevolent aliens or spiritual dimensions of secular work left him more confused than enlightened. During the lowest point of these doubts, approximately 2 weeks after Keth's departure, John seriously considered trying to forget the entire experience and return to his previous life as if nothing had happened. Maybe it would be better to simply pretend none of this happened, John thought during a particularly difficult morning. Continue farming, fixing things, living the simple life I've always lived. Leave all this talk about guardians and conscious energy to people who are more spiritual than I am. But even as he tried to convince himself to abandon the revelations he had received, John discovered that something had fundamentally changed in his perception. He could no longer work with equipment or care for his land without being conscious of the energetic qualities that Keth had described. It was as if filters that had always limited his perception had been permanently removed. It was during this period of greatest resistance that John experienced a series of events that would force him to confront the reality of his expanded nature regardless of his intellectual doubts about accepting it. The demonstration that would definitively dispel all of John's doubts about the reality of his expanded capabilities began during an apparently routine morning 3 weeks after Keth's departure. John was trying to repair a tractor that had broken down in the middle of harvest season, a situation that would normally be just an expensive inconvenience but now threatened his entire corn crop if not resolved quickly. The problem seemed simple on the surface. The engine simply stopped working during normal operation. But after 2 hours of diagnosis using conventional methods, John couldn't identify the cause. All standard checks, fuel ignition, compression, electrical systems indicated that everything should be working perfectly. Damn, John muttered, wiping grease-stained hands on his work clothes. Going to have to call a mechanic from town, and that's going to cost a fortune. But as he prepared to make the call, John remembered Keith's words about his natural approach to repair, how he unconsciously listened to energetic feedback from systems and collaborated with the functional intention of equipment. Well, can't hurt to try, John said to himself, though he felt slightly foolish. Instead of continuing to search for obvious mechanical failures, John placed his hands on the tractor's hood and simply listened, not with his ears, but with the kind of intuitive perception that Keth had described. Immediately, John felt something he had never experienced so clearly before. It was as if the tractor were trying to communicate with him, transmitting a sense of misalignment that wasn't located in any specific component, but permeated the entire system. Interesting, John murmured, following this sensation to an area of the engine he had already mechanically inspected and found problem-free. This time, instead of looking for visible failures, John simply placed his hands on the components and paid attention to the energetic quality they emanated. One of the pieces, an alternator that tested perfectly functional, emitted a sensation of fatigue, as if it were struggling to maintain performance, despite being technically within specifications. "You're tired, aren't you?" John said to the alternator, feeling only slightly ridiculous for talking to a machine part. Following an impulse he couldn't rationally explain, John removed the alternator and examined it again. This time, instead of testing only electrical function, he paid attention to the quality of energy the part produced. There was something subtle but definite wrong. Not a mechanical failure, but a kind of energetic disharmony. John spent the next 15 minutes simply holding the alternator, applying the same kind of focused healing intention he had used on Keth's ship. He didn't know exactly what he was doing, but followed instinct that told him to treat the part with care and attention as if it were a living organism that needed care. When he reinstalled the alternator and started the tractor, the engine caught immediately and ran more smoothly than it had in months. "Can't be," John said, turning the engine off and on several times to confirm that the problem had really been solved. But this was only the first of a series of demonstrations that followed during the subsequent weeks. The second demonstration came when John visited his neighbor Tom Bradley's farm, where Tom was struggling with an irrigation pump that specialized technicians had declared irreparable. The pump worked intermittently without identifiable pattern, frustrating all conventional diagnostic efforts. "John, can you take a look at this thing?" Tom asked with obvious desperation. "The specialists say I need to buy a new one, but I don't have $5,000 right now." John examined the pump using his expanded approach, paying attention to both mechanical and energetic aspects of the system. He quickly identified that the problem wasn't in the pump itself, but in the quality of electrical energy feeding it. "Tom, when was the last time you checked the wiring running from the main electrical box to here?" John asked. "About 2 years, maybe 3, Tom replied. "But the technicians said the voltage was correct." "Voltage might be correct," John explained, "but the quality of the energy could be unstable." John traced the electrical wiring and found several connections that were technically functional, but creating subtle resistance that resulted in irregular energy fluctuations. It wasn't something that would show up in standard electrical tests, but it created instability that affected the pump's operation. After cleaning connections and applying what he secretly thought of as harmonizing intention to the entire electrical system, the pump worked perfectly. "How the hell did you know where to look?" Tom asked, clearly impressed. "Just experience," John replied, not feeling ready to explain about energetic perception. The third demonstration was even more dramatic. John was called to help with a problem in the Petersonen dairy farm's milking equipment, a complex system that had developed a mysterious failure that was contaminating milk with bacteria. Despite all cleaning protocols being followed correctly, veterinarians and specialized technicians had inspected all the equipment multiple times without finding the source of contamination. The Peterson family was facing the possibility of losing their dairy production license if the problem wasn't resolved quickly. John applied his expanded approach, paying attention not just to mechanical aspects of the equipment, but to the energetic quality of the entire system. He discovered that one of the cleaning components was working mechanically but wasn't creating the kind of energy field that inhibited bacterial growth. "This is going to sound strange," John said to Bill Peterson, "but try operating the cleaning cycle with conscious intention that the system is creating a perfectly clean and healthy environment for the milk." What Bill replied, obviously confused. "Just focus on really wanting the equipment to create a clean environment, not just going through the motions," John explained as best he could without sounding completely crazy. Bill followed John's suggestion, and to everyone's surprise, the bacterial contamination stopped immediately. "It doesn't make scientific sense," Bill admitted, but it worked. The most convincing demonstration came when John was asked to examine problems at a local rural school where multiple systems, heating, electrical, and even kitchen equipment had begun failing simultaneously without identifiable cause. "It's like the entire building is sick," explained the principal, Mrs. Henderson. "Different technicians have examined each system and can't find anything specifically wrong, but nothing is working right." John spent an entire afternoon at the school applying his expanded perception to the entire building. What he discovered was fascinating. There was a kind of energetic disharmony permeating the entire structure, as if the building itself was stressed or imbalanced. Tracing the source of this disharmony, John discovered it was originating from an area where a new cell tower had been installed 3 months earlier, creating subtle electromagnetic interference that didn't show up in conventional tests but was affecting sensitive systems. The solution is going to sound completely crazy, John warned Mrs. Henderson, but try having the entire school teachers, staff students focus positive intention on the building for a week. Things like expressing gratitude for the school, visualizing all systems working harmoniously, treating the building like a living space that deserves care. Mrs. Henderson was desperate enough to try anything. During the following week, she implemented a school appreciation program where the entire school community participated in activities focused on valuing and caring for the building. To everyone's surprise, systems began working normally again. I can't explain it scientifically, Mrs. Henderson admitted to John, but whatever you did or suggested clearly worked. When these demonstrations accumulated over a period of several weeks, John could no longer deny the reality of his expanded capabilities. He had consistently diagnosed and resolved problems that specialized technicians couldn't identify using methods that transcended conventional mechanical knowledge. Keth was right. John finally admitted to himself during a quiet night on his farm. There is something different about the way I work with equipment and systems, and whatever it is, it's getting stronger. With all his doubts definitively dispelled by the consistent demonstrations of his expanded capabilities, John was ready to receive even more profound revelations that would completely transform his understanding of work spirituality and the true purpose of human existence. These revelations came unexpectedly during a night when John was working late in his workshop and felt a familiar presence approaching. It wasn't Keith returning physically, but a clear telepathic communication that crossed cosmic distances to reach him. John Miller came the familiar mental transmission. You have demonstrated remarkable mastery over principles I taught. You are now ready to understand deeper truths about the nature of your function and the greater meaning of conscious work in planetary evolution. The first profound revelation concerned the true nature of all human work and professions when practiced with appropriate consciousness. Each profession in your society, Keth transmitted, was originally designed as a specific form of spiritual service. Doctors were meant to channel divine healing energy. Teachers were to facilitate the awakening of innate wisdom. Farmers like yourself were charged with maintaining harmony between human consciousness and planetary natural intelligence. John learned that the separation between secular and sacred work was artificial, a distortion that had developed as humanity lost connection with the spiritual dimensions of practical life. In evolved civilizations, Keth explained, there is no distinction between work and prayer, between professional function and spiritual practice. All work is recognized as opportunity to channel conscious energy for the benefit of larger systems. The second profound revelation related to the true nature of Earth as a conscious organism and how different professions serve specific functions in maintaining its health and evolution. Your planet is a living, conscious entity. Keith revealed, farmers like you serve as interfaces between human consciousness and planetary consciousness. Doctors facilitate cellular healing in the planetary body. Builders and engineers maintain energy circulatory systems. Artists and educators nurture cultural evolution that is equivalent to planetary neural development. John understood that his farm wasn't simply private property, but an acupuncture point in the planetary energy system where human conscious energy interfaced directly with Earth's natural intelligence. The third profound revelation was about future events that would completely transform the relationship between human work and technology. In the coming decades, Keth transmitted, your species will develop technologies that operate through conscious collaboration between human mind and awakened artificial intelligence. Work will become partnership between organic consciousness and living technological systems. John saw through telepathic transmissions glimpses of a future where farmers consciously collaborated with intelligent agricultural systems that responded directly to human intention and emotion, where builders co-created with materials that self-organize based on mental vision, and where healers worked with medical devices that amplified natural healing capabilities. Your experiences repairing my ship, Keth explained, were preparation for an era when all human technology will be based on similar principles of conscious collaboration. The fourth profound revelation concerned the specific role that workers like John would play during humanity's transition to this expanded form of civilization. Individuals who have rediscovered the spiritual dimensions of their work, Keth revealed, will serve as bridges between old paradigms based on separation and new paradigms based on conscious collaboration. You will demonstrate through example that work can be simultaneously practical and sacred. John understood that he had been prepared not just to apply conscious principles on his own farm, but to teach others how to integrate spirituality with professional competence in ways that honored both practical efficiency and service to the greater good. The fifth profound revelation was about the spiritual lineage of the Miller family and how previous generations had served similar functions during different periods of history. Your great-grandmother was a natural healer who used medicinal plants, Keith revealed. Your grandfather facilitated harmony between human communities and local ecosystems through intuitive agricultural practices. Your father maintained energetic stability during a period of rapid industrialization. Each generation adapted the same essential function to the needs of their time. John learned that it wasn't coincidence that members of his family had always been known for having a special touch with plants, animals, and equipment. It was a manifestation of an inherited capacity to harmonize conscious energy with material systems. The sixth profound revelation related to the nature of the tools John used and how they could be consciously expanded to facilitate even more effective work. Your hands, Keth transmitted, are instruments of energy channeling. Your focused intention is the most advanced technology available for harmonious reorganization of matter. Your genuine compassion generates frequencies that automatically align systems with optimal function. John discovered that he could consciously develop these capabilities through focused practice learning to perceive and direct energy flows with increasing precision. The seventh profound revelation was about larger cosmic events that were influencing planetary spiritual awakening and why the current timing was critical for the rediscovery of conscious work. Earth is passing through a galactic energy field that accelerates conscious evolution, Keith explained. During the next 3 decades, more humans will naturally develop capabilities you are rediscovering. Those who integrate these capabilities with practical work will serve as models for civilizational transformation. The final and most extraordinary revelation concerned the fundamental nature of reality and how expanded understanding would completely transform human concepts of work purpose and success. Physical reality. Keth transmitted with profound solemnity is a dimensional school where consciousness learns to create through loving collaboration with matter. True work is not about earning money or achieving status, but about consciously participating in the ongoing process of divine creation. John understood that each task he performed, from planting seeds to repairing equipment, was an opportunity to collaborate directly with the fundamental creative forces that organized and maintained all existence. When you work with love and consciousness, Edith concluded, you are not merely completing practical tasks, but actively participating in the continuous evolution of creation itself. Your work becomes a form of living prayer expression of divine gratitude and direct contribution to the well-being of all life. When these extraordinary revelations finally ended, John Miller was no longer simply a farmer who had developed unusual repair abilities. He had become an awakened consciousness, consciously participating in the most sacred project possible, the continuous evolution of reality through work performed with love, consciousness, and intention dedicated to serving something greater than personal benefits. He understood that his simple life on the farm was actually one of the highest forms of spiritual practice, a living demonstration of how ordinary work could be transformed into extraordinary service when performed with appropriate consciousness about its true nature and purpose. With the profound revelations about the sacred nature of work fully integrated into his consciousness, John Miller underwent an internal transformation that fundamentally redefined not only how he perceived his profession, but how he experienced every moment of his existence. This metamorphosis didn't happen all at once, but unfolded gradually during the following months, each day bringing new layers of understanding that brought him ever closer to his true nature as a conscious collaborator in planetary evolution. The first and most profound transformation occurred in his relationship with daily work. Before Keth's revelations, John had seen farming and equipment repair as practical necessities, things that needed to be done to keep the property functioning and generate enough income to survive. Now each task had transformed into a sacred opportunity to channel divine energy for the benefit of larger systems. I'm not just planting corn, John reflected during his first planting season after the awakening. I'm collaborating with planetary intelligence to nurture growth that will feed bodies and souls. Each seed I plant is an act of faith in divine abundance. This new perspective completely transformed the quality of his experience during work. Tasks that had previously been routine or even tedious now became active meditations, where John consciously directed love and positive intention through each action. The second significant transformation was in the development of consistent and refined perception of subtle energies in all aspects of his property. John discovered that he could perceive not just the physical state of plants, animals, and equipment, but also their energetic vitality, emotional needs, and potential for optimal growth. It's like I've developed new senses, John wrote in a journal he began keeping to document his experiences. I can feel when a plant is stressed before physical symptoms appear sense, when animals need emotional attention beyond physical care, and detect when equipment is developing energetic problems that will eventually manifest as mechanical failures. This expanded perception allowed him to address problems preventively rather than reactively, maintaining all systems under his care in states of harmony and health that transcended results possible through conventional methods. The third transformation was in the development of a natural capacity to infuse healing and harmonizing intention into anything he touched. John discovered that when he worked from genuine love and sincere desire to serve the greater good, his hands literally transmitted energy that promoted health growth and optimal function. It's not that I've developed magical powers, John explained to himself when trying to understand these capabilities. It's more like I've remembered how to use natural abilities I've always possessed but never consciously recognized. This ability manifested in notably practical ways. Plants he touched with a loving intention grew more vigorously. Animals he treated with genuine compassion showed improved health and calmer temperaments. Equipment he repaired with care lasted longer and functioned more efficiently than would be expected based on technical maintenance alone. The fourth significant transformation was in the development of a conscious and continuous connection with what Keth had described as planetary intelligence. John came to experience his farm not as property he owned, but as a section of a larger living organism with which he was privileged to collaborate. The land teaches me as much as I care for it, John realized during one of his contemplative walks through the fields. There's a wisdom operating through natural systems that's much greater than any knowledge I can acquire through books or formal training. This connection provided him with access to intuitive guidance about optimal timing for planting and harvesting, about which crops would grow best in specific areas, and about how to maintain ecological balance that benefited all life on the property. The fifth transformation was in the development of a capacity to see connections between his local work and larger global patterns. John began to understand viscerally how his actions on his small farm connected with the health and well-being of much larger systems. Each act of care I perform here sends waves of positive energy that extend far beyond my property's boundaries, John understood. When I cultivate with consciousness and love, I contribute to planetary healing. When I repair equipment with harmonious intention, I add energetic stability to larger technological networks. This expanded perspective gave his work a sense of cosmic purpose that transformed even the most mundane tasks into meaningful contributions to planetary well-being. The sixth transformation was in the development of a completely new relationship with time and efficiency. John discovered that when he worked from centered presence and loving intention, he accomplished more in less time, but paradoxically without any sense of rush or stress. Time behaves differently when I work consciously, John observed. Hours can pass like minutes when I'm completely present in what I'm doing. But somehow I accomplish more than I used to do in entire days of work when I was just going through the motions. The seventh transformation was in the development of a natural capacity to inspire similar awakening in others. Through his example and presence, without making any deliberate effort to teach or convert people, John discovered that neighbors and visitors frequently experience changes in their own relationship with work. After spending time on his property, there's something different about John's farm, commented Tom Bradley after several visits. I can't put my finger on exactly what it is, but spending time there makes me rethink my own approach to farming. It's like the place radiates a quality of peace and purpose that's contagious. The eighth transformation was in the development of harmonious integration between practical competence and spiritual wisdom. John discovered that his expanded capabilities didn't make him less effective in technical aspects of farming and repair, but actually amplified his competence in ways that surprised even him. Spirituality didn't make me less practical, John reflected. It made me more practical in ways that transcend conventional technique. I can still use all the skills I've developed over decades, but now I have access to additional dimensions of knowledge and capability. The ninth and most profound transformation was in the development of direct experiential understanding of his nature as an individual expression of universal consciousness, serving a specific function in planetary evolution. John didn't just intellectually believe that he was part of something greater. He experienced this reality as a natural and continuous aspect of his awakened consciousness. I'm not John Miller, who has a spiritual connection to work. John understood with total clarity. I am universal consciousness exploring the experience of serving planetary evolution through the function of John Miller farmer and repairer. My personal identity is a temporary vehicle for the expression of eternal purpose. All these transformations integrated to create in John Miller a unique presence in the rural community. A man who operated with exceptional practical competence while radiating qualities of consciousness that elevated anyone sensitive enough to perceive the extraordinary depth that had awakened within him. He had truly become a bridge between worlds, demonstrating that it was possible to live a life completely engaged in practical work while consciously operating as an active collaborator in the continuous evolution of creation itself. His farm became a living example of how ordinary work could be transformed into extraordinary service when performed with appropriate consciousness about its true nature and sacred purpose. With his internal transformations deeply consolidated, John Miller developed a revolutionary understanding of reality that completely redefined his perception of work technology, spirituality, and the true meaning of human life on Earth. This new perspective wasn't merely philosophical, but a lived and practical perception that influenced every aspect of his existence in preparation to serve as an example of how any profession could be transformed into a sacred path of service. The first aspect of his new understanding related to the true nature of all professions. and how each serves specific functions in maintaining and evolving planetary consciousness. John came to understand that there were no more spiritual or less spiritual jobs, only different degrees of consciousness about the sacred nature of all productive activity. A mechanic who repairs cars with love and intention to serve is doing work as sacred as a monk in prayer. John reflected during one of his morning meditations in the field. The difference isn't in the profession, but in the quality of consciousness the person brings to their work. This understanding allowed him to see connections between agriculture and all other forms of human work. Doctors heal bodies the same way he heals sick land. Teachers planted seeds of knowledge like he planted physical seeds. Builders created structures that sheltered life like he created environments that nurtured growth. The second aspect of his new understanding involved a transformed perception of technology in its future evolution. John understood that tools and machines weren't dead objects to be dominated, but extensions of human consciousness that function best when treated as collaborative partners. All technology is crystallized human intention, John realized. When I use tools with respect and gratitude, they respond by operating at their optimal capacity. When I work against them or treat them as mere objects, they resist and fail more frequently. This perspective explained why his repairs lasted longer and his equipment functioned more reliably than would be expected based on technical maintenance alone. He had developed collaborative relationships with his tools that transcended purely mechanical operation. The third aspect of his new understanding related to the nature of abundance and how appropriate consciousness about work could create prosperity that benefited everyone involved. John discovered that when he worked from genuine service rather than personal gain alone, necessary resources appeared in ways that seemed almost miraculous. True abundance doesn't come from taking more for myself, John understood, but from giving more of myself to larger systems. When my farming serves the health of the land and nutrition of the community, the land responds by producing more abundantly than when I focused only on maximum profit. This understanding had completely transformed his approach to financial management of his farm. He made decisions based on what would serve the long-term well-being of all systems involved and discovered that sustainable prosperity followed naturally. The fourth aspect of his new understanding involved a deep perception about education and how true knowledge was transmitted. John understood that the most valuable skill he could share wasn't specific techniques, but the consciousness that informed all techniques. I can teach someone how to plant corn or repair an engine, John reflected, but if they don't understand the spirit behind the action, they'll never achieve results that transcend mechanical competence. This realization inspired him to begin mentoring young people in the community, not just in practical skills, but in developing the quality of presence and intention that made any work extraordinary. The fifth aspect of his new understanding related to the nature of time and how working consciously could create experiences of temporal expansion that allowed accomplishing more in less time. John discovered that when he was completely present in his work, time seemed to slow down and expand. Time isn't a fixed quantity, John observed. Consciousness can influence our experience of time. When I work with complete presence and love, hours feel like minutes, but I accomplish more than an entire days of unconscious activity. The sixth aspect of his new understanding involved an understanding of healing and how conscious work could be therapeutic both for the person doing the work and for all systems involved. John discovered that when he approached any task as an opportunity to channel healing energy, everyone and everything benefited. My farming doesn't just produce food, John understood. It heals land that was damaged by previous practices, heals my own soul through meaningful engagement with life, and contributes to healing larger planetary systems through demonstration of harmonious relationship between humans and nature. The seventh aspect of his new understanding related to the nature of community and how working consciously could strengthen bonds between people while serving the greater good. John discovered that when his work was motivated by genuine service, It automatically attracted others who shared similar values. Conscious work is magnetic. John realized when people see someone working with joy, confidence, and genuine care for the greater good, they're inspired to explore similar possibilities in their own lives. The eighth aspect of his new understanding involved a perception about legacy and how working consciously created positive effects that extended far beyond immediate results of specific tasks. John understood that each action performed with love and consciousness sent waves of positive influence through time and space. I'm not just maintaining this farm for my own lifetime, John reflected. Everything I do with conscious intention contributes to an energy field that will influence this land, this community, and even future generations in ways I can't fully understand. The ninth aspect of his new understanding related to the nature of prayer and how working consciously was itself one of the most powerful forms of spiritual practice. John discovered that when he approached work as an opportunity to express gratitude and serve something greater than personal benefit, each action became a form of active prayer. Working with love is my primary spiritual practice, John understood. Each day spent caring for land animals and equipment with conscious intention is a day spent in direct communion with the creative forces that maintain all life. The tenth and most profound aspect of his new understanding related to the nature of consciousness itself and how human work could serve as a vehicle for evolution of consciousness on a planetary scale. John understood that when enough people discovered the sacred dimension of their work, humanity would transform into a completely different type of civilization. We're all participating in the evolution of consciousness, John understood with total clarity. Each person who discovers the sacred nature of their work contributes to a critical mass that will eventually transform all human activity from exploitation to collaboration, from taking to giving, from unconscious activity to conscious service. With all these aspects integrated, John Miller had developed a philosophy of life that honored both practical competence and spiritual wisdom, demonstrating that it was possible to live a life completely engaged in the practical world while consciously operating as a collaborative agent in the continuous evolution of creation itself. His farm had become more than a business or even a lifestyle. It was a demonstration center where people could see firsthand how ordinary work could be transformed into extraordinary service when approached with appropriate consciousness about its true nature and sacred purpose. In the years that followed his awakening to the sacred nature of work, John Miller discovered that his life had become a living demonstration of possibilities that most people considered impossible. His expanded capabilities didn't remain secrets guarded on his isolated farm, but became natural aspects of how he operated in all areas of his life, creating waves of influence that spread far beyond his initial expectations. The most notable change was in how John related to every aspect of his daily work. Neighbors and visitors began to observe that he seemed to have an almost magical connection with his land, his animals, and his equipment. Plants grew more vigorously in his fields. Animals showed exceptional health and calm temperaments, and equipment he maintained functioned with reliability that defied normal expectations. John Miller has a special gift, commented Bill Peterson, a neighboring farmer, during a local cooperative meeting. It's as if he can talk to the land itself. His crops are always the best in the region, and his equipment never breaks down when he needs it most. But John never publicly revealed the true source of his expanded capabilities. Instead, he attributed his successes to careful attention and respect for the land and equipment. This natural humility made his abilities seem less supernatural and more like an inspiring example that any dedicated person could develop a similar relationship with their work. During the 5 years following his awakening, John began to attract attention from farmers throughout the state, agricultural technicians, and even some researchers who were interested in studying his apparently intuitive methods of farming and equipment repair. Without ever mentioning alien spacecraft or telepathic communication, John gradually introduced concepts about conscious work and respectful collaboration with natural and technological systems. The secret he explained during workshops he began conducting for other farmers is understanding that farming isn't about dominating the land, but about forming a partnership with it. And equipment works better when you treat it as trusted partners rather than mere tools. These presentations had extraordinary impact on agricultural professionals who implemented Jay's approaches and discovered significant improvements in productivity, sustainability, and personal satisfaction with their work. Many reported developing enhanced intuitions about their land's needs and deeper emotional connections with their work. John Miller is quietly revolutionizing how we think about agriculture and rural work, observed Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a sustainable agriculture specialist who had studied John's methods for over 2 years. He demonstrates that when we integrate genuine respect with technical competence, we achieve results that transcend any isolated approach. But perhaps the most significant impact of John's work was on ordinary people who visited his farm or participated in his workshops. Many reported transformative experiences, moments of understanding about the sacred potential of their own work, insights about how to find deeper purpose in daily activities, and inexplicable sensations of connection with something greater than themselves. There's something special about how John approaches work, wrote Maria Santos, a teacher who had visited his farm in an online review that went viral. He made me realize that teaching isn't just transmitting information, but nurturing human growth. After seeing how he treats every aspect of his work as sacred, I began approaching my classroom the same way. During his conversations with visitors and workshop participants, John frequently encountered people who seemed to be going through their own moments of awakening to deeper dimensions of their work. Without forcing conversations or offering unsolicited advice, he simply offered compassionate presence and attentive listening, allowing others to process their own revelations in a safe and non-judgmental environment. I met John during a period when I was questioning whether my work as a mechanic had any real meaning, shared Tom Richardson, a mechanic who had participated in one of John's workshops. He never talked about his spirituality directly, but something about seeing how he treated his equipment with such respect and care made me rethink my own approach. Now I see each repair as an opportunity to restore something to its intended function. John's communications with Keth continued sporadically over the years, but evolved from direct guidance to confirmations that he was on the right path, and encouragement to continue serving as an example of conscious work. John Miller Keth transmitted during one of their most recent communications. You are demonstrating exactly how spiritual awakening can be integrated with practical life. Your farm has become a beacon that inspires others to discover sacred dimensions of their own work. John also discovered he wasn't alone in his mission. Through connections that formed naturally, he connected with dozens of other individuals around the country who were facilitating similar awakening in their own spheres of influence. Doctors who integrated healing intention with conventional medicine, educators who treated teaching as sacred practice, builders who saw each project as an opportunity to serve genuine human needs. We're all participating in the same awakening, John reflected during one of his nighttime meditations in the field, each demonstrating how common work can become extraordinary when approached with consciousness and love. Now more than 7 years after his first contact with the K.E. John Miller has established himself as one of the most respected voices in sustainable agriculture and conscious work in the American Midwest. His characteristically humble but extraordinarily effective approach has inspired hundreds of workers to expand their own practices beyond purely technical limitations. But his most important legacy is demonstrating that ordinary people can transform ordinary jobs into extraordinary passive service when they understand that every profession carries potential to channel divine energy when practiced with love, consciousness, and intention to serve something greater than personal benefit. You who are listening to this story live in an era when awakenings like John Miller are becoming increasingly common around the world. If you have ever felt that your work could be more meaningful than just earning money, if you have experienced moments when you felt truly connected to greater purpose through your professional activity, if you have had intuitions about how your work could serve a greater good, John's journey offers confirmation that your perceptions are correct. The central message that emerges from John's extraordinary transformation is simultaneously simple and revolutionary. Your current profession, whatever it may be, is your spiritual path when infused with love and appropriate consciousness. You don't need to abandon your work to find sacred purpose. You need to discover the sacred dimension that already exists within the work you already do. If you work with your hands, whether fixing things, building, cooking, or any activity that involves creation or repair, John's story suggests you may be being called to rediscover how loving intention can transform technical results in ways that transcend conventional explanation. The capabilities John developed: intuitive perception of problems before they manifest, ability to make equipment last longer through conscious care, capacity to create abundance through genuine service are not special gifts unique to him, but latent potentials that exist within all human consciousness when applied with love and intention to serve. Remember that transformative encounters like John's experience with Kay are not random events, but aspects of a larger process through which we are gently awakened to possibilities that have always existed within us. If you feel drawn to approach your work with more consciousness, if you experience moments of deep satisfaction when working with genuine care, if you have intuitions about how your work could benefit larger systems, this may be a sign that you too are being prepared to discover sacred dimensions of your profession. The transformation John experienced from competent farmer to living demonstration of conscious work shows that it's possible to live a completely practical life while consciously operating as a channel for benevolent forces that facilitate planetary evolution through common human activity. You don't need alien technology or dramatic mystical experiences to awaken to the sacred nature of your work. You need only the willingness to approach your daily activities with genuine presence, loving intention, and recognition that you are participating in something much greater than personal achievement. The universe is filled with opportunities to transform ordinary work into extraordinary service. Your preparation for this transformation can begin simply through more conscious attention to the quality of intention you bring to your professional activities and willingness to treat your work as an opportunity to express genuine care for the welfare of larger systems. You are living during a period of awakening where truths about the sacred nature of work are being rediscovered by people in all professions. The only question that remains is, are you ready to discover how your current profession can become your spiritual path through applied consciousness and love in action? And you who have just heard this extraordinary story about awakening to sacred dimensions of common work, have you had experiences where you felt deeper connection to purpose through your professional activity? Have you noticed that when you work with care and genuine intention, results transcend technical expectations? Leave in the comments your own experiences with moments when work became a form of sacred service. You may discover you carry more potential for conscious work than you imagine. If this story about transforming common work into a sacred path resonated deeply with something within you, subscribe to Stories from Beyond and ring the bell so you don't miss other narratives that explore how spiritual awakening can be integrated with practical life. And share this video with people you sense are seeking more meaning in their work and ready to discover that any profession can be a path of service when practiced with appropriate consciousness. Remember, in a universe where conscious work is a form of living prayer, and every loving action contributes to planetary evolution, the only limits to transforming your profession into a sacred path are those you choose to accept about your own work's potential to serve something greater than personal benefit.